This is Leaders in the Trenches, and your host today is Gene Hammett.
Hi, my name is Gene Hammett. I'm the host of Leaders in the Trenches. My question for you today is, what does your foundation for growth look like? Yep, that's a very interesting question, right? What is the foundation for growth for your business? Well, what I've found is it's not necessarily your marketing strategies or sales strategies or strategies at all that are most important for the growth of your business. The most important element is the leadership alignment with the people and how the culture really supports fast growth. Those two things are the foundation, your leadership and culture. Now, I wanted to have someone special on today. I rarely find anyone who has studied growth as much as I have. So I have Tiffani Bova. Tiffani is an evangelist for Salesforce.com. She also is the author of GrowthIQ. I messed that up a little bit, but she is a fantastic interview. We talked about some of the core things that she saw in the patterns of growth, and she really talked about the importance of sequencing. Find out what I mean by listening to the full episode, but you want to tune into this episode if you want to grow your company. So here is Tiffani Bova. Hi, Tiffani. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, because we talked before the new year and set this up. You are someone I'm really looking forward to talk to, because we think a lot in some ways. I think there's some ways there's a little bit of controversy, which we might get into a little bit here.
Oh, good. Love that.
But I really am excited about having you because of the depth that you've gone to understand growth. There's very few people that have done that. You do it from one perspective. I do it from another. And we're going to have a great conversation here for the Leaders in the Trenches audience.
Excellent. I'm super excited about it.
So the first question I want to start with, I've already introduced you, but I'd love for them to hear in your own voice. Tell us about you and who you serve.
Well, in all sort of kidding, I like to say I'm a recovering seller who accidentally started running marketing organizations and customer service organizations, and then really accidentally ended up in the analyst community working at Gartner as a research fellow for a decade, helping very small businesses, startups, all the way to Fortune 10 companies figure out how to go to market and improve sales performance and marketing performance and really survive and thrive in this digital age of digital transformation. And now the last 3 years I've spent as an evangelist on growth and innovation at Salesforce, traveling around the world, meeting with customers, and as well speaking at events, really about trying to help people feel more comfortable and confident about how to use technology to help them grow going forward.
Well, we're going to dive into this because you also published a book that is getting a lot of acclaims, GrowthIQ. Tell me why that book had to be written.
Well, I'd like to say that I'm a talker, not a writer. And so my challenge always was, as I was traveling around and doing keynotes around the world over probably about a 10-year period, many of the people I was on stage with had a book and I didn't have one. And everyone's like, well, you really should have a book. And I'm like, oh, but I don't write like that. So I went on this exploratory journey of, if I was going to write one, what would I write about? And I started to see patterns in companies that were growing versus companies that were really struggling to grow. And what did those patterns mean? And I've been told one of my superpowers is that I'm able to sort of see the Big Dipper and all the stars of data and sort of touch points and conversations I have, and be able to really shape that into a story. And my challenge was, well, how do I get it on paper? Easy for me to do on stage. How do I get it on paper? And so it became a passion for me putting the book together, and I wanted to do it in a way that was telling stories to get the point across versus just using data and analysis, which I think for many is not the right way to share information. So I wrote a book I would want to read, which was some great advice someone gave me many years ago. And so that was really a labor of love for me. And now she's a toddler. She's like 5 months old or something. So she's still a toddler, but really enjoying how people have enjoyed the book.
Well, they grow up faster than human years. I think it's even faster than dog years.
Everyone's already asking me what's the next book. I'm like, oh my God, I haven't, once I finished the book, I didn't read it again. And then I did the audio book of it. And so that was, almost 40 hours of recording for a 9.5-hour audio book. And so I've now can say I've read it word for word, cover to cover. but
Let,
I don't know if I'm ready for another one.
let's just go ahead and say, because I don't know how that was for you. It was one of the hardest experiences of my life to record my book.
It was odd. I'll just say it was just really, really odd.
Because we don't read every word. I didn't know that. Like our brains go so fast, we don't read every word. But with the audiobook, you have to read the script, right?
Oh yeah, and my producer was she just hold up her hand. it was a hold up your hand. That would be, I must have missed a word, right? And so you, like, even if it's seasons and you say season, hand would go up. Like, it's very, very specific. So it's really exhausting and tiring, but a lot of fun to do.
I will say this, and we'll get into the content. Everyone tells me this, and I've listened to audiobooks too. It's so much more fun when the author reads it. So I appreciate you did that, and I did it for my book as well.
Well, I had to try out to read my book.
Can she do this? So I want to dive right into this. I want to start with the big idea. So you've been studying growth. You've been looking at growth for decades, from your days with Gartner, doing data research, but also, in what you currently do now. So what's the big idea for growth?
There were a few that really came to light in those patterns that I was talking about, that I learned when I was working with companies that were in hypergrowth mode, right? They were barreling towards an IPO, and they were sort of, trying to get to unicorn status. They were one of those very hypergrowth, fast growth companies. Somebody who's been around for a while, who is still growing, and then companies that were in a growth stall, and meaning that they were finding it more challenging to grow, or they were flat out not growing at all anymore. And the big idea that came out of the book was not necessarily the paths I uncovered, because there's sort of 10 paths to growth. It was all about the combination of paths. Mm-hmm. Number one. Number two, the order in which things were done, or sequence in which they were done. Those two things were really the determining factor for me on whether companies were going to grow or not grow. So it was the combination of activities and the sequence in which they did them.
The sequence, I always think of it, it's like the phone number. You got to get the sequence right. And it's different at different times of the market. It's different with them, different industries and whatnot, from what I've seen. What could you tell us about discovering your sequence?
Well, I was looking for an analogy when I was writing the book, and I was sort of going to start, like, if you're trying to climb Mount Everest, you don't just climb it, right? You start at the base camp, you spend an amount of time at the base camp, then you go up to the second camp, you come back down, you can't cheat the sequence, right? If you're going to go from the bottom to the top of Mount Everest, you cannot cheat the sequence.
Yep.
So that was one analogy I tried. And then I said, well, hold on a second. Like, let me think about cooking. If I laid out the exact same ingredients Julia Child laid out, and we were going to cook cordon bleu, even if we use the exact same ingredients, it would taste much better coming from her. And so that is that feel and the sequence of when to do this and when to boil that and when to add this and when to add that and how much and all those things. And so sequence for me was really, really important. And when I started to deconstruct the case studies that I was using in the book, there's 30 of them. When I started to deconstruct what a company was doing when they were either growing or not growing, I started to see the things and the order in which they did them, which started to lead me to believe that whether it was people, systems, process, product, sales, marketing, distribution, supply chain, whatever it was, if it was a little bit out of sequence, it had an impact in their success.
Yeah. Well, you've mentioned patterns more than once here, and that's one of the things I'm looking for. I've done over 300 interviews with the Inc. 5000 as my focus. So they're growing at really astronomical levels. I interviewed a company the other day, 39,000% over a 3-year period, and just really exciting stuff. What did you see in the patterns that you could share with us today?
Well, one thing for sure, it's not one thing, that, I would get asked the question a lot, like, what's the one thing we can do this quarter to turn around sales? Or what's the one thing we can do to start to increase brand awareness for us or improve social media performance or sales performance? And everyone's looking for the one thing.
Yep.
And so the pattern that I started to see was that everyone was looking for the one thing. And then I came behind it and realized that, look, it isn't just one thing. And so, there were a few paths like customer experience, sales optimization that were pretty consistently showing themselves in everyone's journey towards growth. And I think that would be an obvious one. Like if you can't sell well and you're not servicing your customers well, you're going to have a natural problem. But I'd say that there were no real patterns in certain combinations of growth paths that were more successful than others, because the variation happened because of the context of the company and the market, which was really the starting point of the book. Like, what is the context of what is your product? Who are your customers? Where are you serving? Where are you selling? And so that context made everyone unique. And so whenever I work with companies that say, we've been watching what our competitors are doing and we want to do the same thing, I'm always like, but you're not selling to the same customers and you may not be selling entirely the same set of products. So why would you compare yourself to somebody who may compete with you in a segment or in a particular category, but you're not the same company. So getting people to think differently about context and then not trying to just replicate other people's success stories because they cannot tell the sequence from the outside. That's,
what do you mean by that?
So if you're looking at a competitor and you say, oh, they just launched a new social media campaign. And then you say, so we're going to launch one too, but you don't know before they launched that social media campaign, they shored up their e-commerce site, they changed their website, they rebranded, they did 4 or 5 things, then they launched their social media initiative, right? And so all you see is the social media. So you go and run and replicate the social media and you haven't made sure that the other things are in place and you don't have the same kind of success. So that sequence and combination is something very hard to replicate because you don't have the ability and access to see what they've actually done. You only see the outcome and the end result.
That's pretty smart because, it does take people from the outside try to reconstruct or re-engineer something and they can't see everything. When I think about the research I did with the Inc. 5000, I went into it looking at growth with an open mind, going, which marketing and sales strategies were most prevalent? And you probably won't be surprised by this because I was interviewing different kinds of companies in different markets. Some of them were niche players and some of them weren't. And some of them focused on sales and some of them didn't. And so I really never saw patterns there. But one of the things I did see patterns is how they had leadership and culture. What could you tell me about your work on leadership specifically?
Well, I'm going to start with culture because you nailed it.
Okay.
When you think about something like a blue ocean strategy, right? Like we're going to go and innovate and do something no one's ever done before. And when someone's growing at the rates like you just described in the Inc. 5000, they're solving some unmet need. They're doing something someone wasn't doing or they're doing it better. The challenge that you have if you just try to go and do that is you may not have a culture that is innovative, meaning like you don't reward failure. You don't allow people time to think. The metrics and KPIs don't actually foster that kind of behavior. Or even if you're going to do something like we're going to become a customer-led company, but our metrics are not customer-led, right? Our metrics are very internally focused. And so the culture of the company has everything to do with innovation. I will use where I work now. Obviously, I work at Salesforce as the growth and innovation evangelist. And I would tell you that there's no accident that we're one of the most innovative companies in the world and we're one of the best places to work pretty much globally. And so if you look at those high performers on the Inc. 5000 or the Fortune 500, you're going to start to see that they're also landing on the best places to work lists. Because if you have a culture where everyone is really rowing towards the same vision and they understand what they're doing every day and you treat your employees really well, they'll treat your customers really well. They'll go the extra mile. Even if they're doing things like working 4-day work weeks or remotely working, it really has everything to do with the culture, because if your people are happy, your customers are happy. So I think you nailed it. I think it would be interesting for you to ask that question in that Inc. 500, right? Do you think culture is a competitive differentiator for you? And I'm going to guess many of them would say yes.
I will tell you that, when I got into it, I wasn't sure what to expect, but after hundreds of interviews, they're proud of their growth levels, but the number that they're most proud of was their retention rate.
Yeah, exactly.
And mainly, and this is one of the areas where we kind of butted heads a few weeks ago when we talked. I said, of this research, and it's over 300 interviews right now, 94.1% say leaders' job is to put employees first versus customer first.
Mm-hmm.
And now I do believe it's a hard decision, and it's very closely. And so the way I kind of describe it is it's employees first, but you have to be customer centric. But you have a little bit different take on that from your perspective of growth, right?
I would agree with you saying that, right? You have to be employee led and customer centric. I think that's a great way to show how they're tied together. I feel like it's the same coin, that your customers will only be as happy as your employees, and without one or the other.
Yeah. I mean, certainly the extreme, you can't run a business without customers and the revenue that supplies.
That's right.
But it really clued into me when I was talking to Kat Cole from Focus Brands. Do you know Kat?
I don't.
So Focus Brands, they have all these food chains like Cinnabon. Have you ever eaten a Cinnabon?
Yeah, not lately, but yes.
As she describes, it's a treat. It's not an everyday kind of thing.
Yes.
But these people are on the front lines. That we hope that they wash their hands, and if they want to care about their work, and so that they wash their hands. And I'm like, that's really important, right? Those employees, if they didn't care about what they're doing and they just showed up to get a paycheck, they don't care.
Right. And I think that and now that's the other side of that what question you asked, which is leadership.
Yep.
And so, she has to allow the employees the freedom to sort of be, their best self, but most successful. But that comes from the reward and metrics and things that they track. And so it can't just be, for example, I'm running a call center, and what's important to me is time to answer, first call resolution.
Yeah.
And as a customer, I'm like, I don't care if you answer the phone quickly. I just want to talk to somebody who can help me. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to have to wait an hour for someone to pick up the phone. So there are limits to how long I'm willing to wait. But answering it really quickly and then transferring me 5 times does not give me a good experience. Or you answer it really quickly, you're going to resolve my problem, but then you do something like, well, the maximum call time for a call center agent is 15 minutes. And so they're not allowed to stay on the phone with me for 30 to solve my problem.
Yeah.
So now the employee will say, and I've had this happen, and it wasn't 15 minutes, it was 30, where the customer service agent actually had to hang up and call me back. Wow. Every 30 minutes. And so because the metric was, I can't be on the phone longer than 30. So not only they weren't empowering the employee to be customer centric, right? To serve me and just keep me on the phone, because if they had, they would have been dinged in their metric. And so those two things are in conflict. Yep. So, you did put me first as an employee. You've given me a nice place to work. You've given me all the tools. You've given me days off. You know what I mean? All of that.
Yeah.
But then you're not customer centric. You say you're customer centric, but the metrics are sort of at conflict with that. So, I think that's where leadership really has to be willing to think differently about how they measure and manage with things like net promoter scores or CSAT, that does 2 things, right? It allows the employee to do what's best for the customer and also get measured on that as well.
When I want to go back to this research 10, because I don't get a chance to talk to really anyone else that has done as much research on growth as I have. And so I'm just pretty excited to be talking to you today. But one of the things around leadership was they really inspire a sense of ownership across the people. And that sense of ownership doesn't have to be profit sharing or even commissions or anything like that, or anything that really tied to money. It's the way they feel about the work. And you mentioned a couple of those things. One of them is, letting them fail. And so did you see the same kind of sense of ownership as a valuable part of that culture or leadership experience for growth companies?
Yeah, I think I coined a term many years ago when I was at Gartner called the seller's dilemma. And I selfishly, took it from Clayton Christensen's Innovator's Dilemma. I'm like, what would resonate with people? And that was, how do I transform a sales growth engine while at the same time running the business, right? The car's going around the track at 100 miles an hour. I have to hit numbers. I have payroll. I have, I'm publicly traded, whatever it might be. And so can I stop that engine long enough to transform the business however it, I need it to be transformed? And I feel the same way when you start thinking about what are the metrics that need to be looked at is, as a leader, allowing your people, depending on where you are in the organization, allowing your people to have time to transform, learn, fail, and keep going, specifically in the growth engine, which tends to be sales, right?
Yeah.
And so how can salespeople fail when we need the revenue, right? So what are the ways that you can do that? Now, I get it that some companies don't sell the way I'm describing here. It might be totally online and there are no salespeople, or they sell through third-party franchisees, or, whatever the case might be. But I think people should, will understand that whatever that engine is that's generating revenue, how do you transform that and innovate that without disrupting revenue and be willing to fail?
Yeah.
And so you can't just bet, do a student body left, and say, we're going to completely change the way we do things. It's about these very small pivots over time where you're testing, failing, iterating, or testing, learning, and you're not necessarily failing, but you're testing and learning and continuing to pivot until you find it, versus doing a 180-degree turn all at once, which I'm not a fan of. I'm not a fan of the sort of the big bang change. I'm very much a fan of leaning into that kind of change.
And that's one of the areas which I talk about, because, we know that when employees have problems, if they bring the problems to their leadership or management, that's kind of old school. Like we were told not to do that. Like, really analyze the problems and then bring us solutions. And then I ask my audiences and whatnot, is like, well, what if you train them to not just bring you solutions, but bring you a test to actually use to see if that is the right solution? Like think the next step, because that's what has to be done, is those small iterations toward growth is through testing. And so you just mentioned that. When you talk about fast growth companies, I would imagine you saw some stuff that was maybe counterintuitive to growth. And I'd love to know what that is.
One of them was slowing down to speed up.
Okay.
I think everyone is trying to do it faster, instead of saying, hold on a second. Like, we need to take a pause. We need to take a beat. We need to, make sure our employees and our teams are able to absorb all this change we're doing simultaneously. Do we need some time in between projects? Do we need to let everyone sort of, regas themselves, right? And get a little bit of time in order to go and attack the next thing you're going to do. That slow down to speed up is something that I think is super valuable. And there's, the story that, or the question, and I think it was really raised, I think it was by Abraham Lincoln, but, if you and I were going to compete on who could chop down more trees, in the course of an hour, and you just started chopping, and I spent the first 15 minutes sharpening my blade.
Yeah. We know who would win.
Right. And so you would chop. Number one, you'd get tired. Number two, your blade would get dull. And by the time you got tired and your blade got dull, I'm just probably starting to chop down the trees. I can do it a lot longer, and my blade is sharper, so I'll work, not as hard as you have. And I potentially am going to chop down more trees than you. But intuitively, it would be like, oh, we have to race to chop down trees. I'm just going to start chopping down trees. But versus saying, hold on a second, like, what's the best way for me to give myself the best chance of success? Well, if my blade isn't sharp, if I'm tired, if I don't pick the right trees, right? That whole sequence conversation. So I think slow down to speed up is counterintuitive.
I just recorded a video. I do some solo episodes for the show, and I just recorded one on that same topic because it kept coming up. And, in your own life, you had just told me you took off 4 weeks from traveling on planes. You needed to slow down so that now you could go into the new year with the intensity to get things done. So that's a perfect example as well.
Yeah. And this is my lean in week. So, like, I didn't just, get right back on a plane, right? You kind of have to say, I need to get back into the groove. And then you have to give yourself, the time. And I think that, as entrepreneurs and small business owners that may be listening, it's also allowing yourself to completely eject from the business. And the only way you can do that is if you're a strong enough leader that has empowered everyone around you to make the right decisions, whether you're there or not there, which means you have the ability to bounce out of the business. Because if it only works when you're there, then you haven't created a culture and a leadership, team to make yourself help be successful.
That's another one of the key disciplines of my research in hypergrowth. So Tiffani, thank you so much for being here at Leaders in the Trenches. If our audience wanted to check you out, check out the book, make sure you mentioned where they could do that.
Yeah, so they can buy GrowthIQ at Barnes and Nobles or any brick and mortar bookstore pretty much across the U.S., as well online at Amazon, at 800 CEO Read and other places. And then it's going to be making its way across the pond in the UK Commonwealth. It's publishing in February of this year. And then it's going to continue on its journey, and it'll be publishing in Spanish, Portuguese, Simple Chinese, and Vietnamese, I think, in the next 18 months or so. So she will be making her global roadshow, I guess. Then also I have a podcast, What's Next with Tiffani Bova, and you can follow me on Twitter at Tiffani_Bova.
Well, thank you for being here, talking growth with me, and it's been a pleasure to have you at Leaders in the Trenches.
All right, thanks for having me.
What a great interview. I just felt like talking to one of my best friends when we were talking about growth, because it lights her up as much as it lights me. Tiffani is such an expert in this, and working at Salesforce, her experience out in the field, also working with other companies at Gartner, it's just an amazing experience to be able to have time with her today on the podcast for you. So if you have any questions about growth, make sure you check out other episodes we have. We have many tips on hypergrowth tips, but also if you have a question, I'd love to know what that is. We'll do more episodes just for that. Just email me, gene@leadersinthetrenches.com, and that is how you best get in touch with me. As always, lead with courage, and I'll see you next time.